African nations have a growing problem. Countries across the continent are facing attacks by Islamist-inspired insurgencies. The so-called Islamic State may have lost influence in Syria and Iraq, but it's now claiming vast territory across Africa, expanding and strengthening its influence together with affiliated armed groups.
Welcome to Current Conflicts. This is a mini episode for the main podcast, How Did That Happen? And once a month, we will look into current conflicts or wars that are not getting that much media coverage and try to figure out how they happened and what the current state of affairs are. Hello, I am your host, Richard Dix, and this is Current Conflicts. This falls under the How Did That Happen family. It is a new show. This is our first episode of this particular show. And I'll kind of explain how things are going to go. This is going to be similar to the Bite-Sized Bios format, where it will be another mini episode of the podcast, but it will kind of take place as where we had 2 Bite-Sized Bios a month that was coming out. We'll now just have 1 Bite-Sized Bio that comes out, but then the other one will be replaced by this Current Conflicts. And what is Current Conflicts, you ask? It's my way of looking at what is currently going on in the world, right? If you look on any given news station at any time, right, they're gonna cover certain wars, certain issues that are happening, right? And all of them, regardless of what their agenda is, they have one. They're only gonna cover certain things. They're only gonna cover what they feel is good for either their viewership or what makes them money, any of those things. And I'm not saying I'm any better than them. I don't make much money on this podcast, if you're wondering. But what I always wanted to know is what's going on the other corners of the earth that no one's talking about, that doesn't make front page news, doesn't make the third page news, right? But it's still pertinent to understanding how the world is working. It's still important because people are dying. You know what I mean? The first one that we're going to cover here, if you've seen it, you clicked on it, it's the Insurgency In Maghreb, right? Which covers a large swath of northwestern Africa. And in the last 30 years alone, I think something like 70,000 people have died in this conflict, in this war. But it's not something you're going to find on CNN. You barely find it on NPR. I did actually hear something about it on NPR a couple of days ago, but it was a quick snippet, and these won't be very long. Just in the future, it's gonna, like I said, it's really gonna follow. It's another vehicle for a mini episode for the How Did That Happen family. Of course, it's gonna be all under that umbrella. But we just want to kind of get into what's happening in these faraway places. We're gonna cover them in all different continents. This first one's in Africa. We're gonna do some in South America. We're gonna do some in Asia. All the places that people are dying every day and no one's really talking about. And this goes hand in hand pretty well with the ending of our most recent Israel-Hamas series, and it's kind of what gave me the inspiration to want to do this. Now, this is a little bit different because they're covering the Israel-Hamas series the Israel-Hamas conflict pretty extensively right now. But I mean, honestly, if I had to ask you, and you were going to be truthful, right, before this happened, how much did you know about it? How much were you reading about it? How much was it on the local news or the nightly news? It didn't make many appearances. And that's why it's important. That's why I took 4 episodes to go back and dig into the entire history. We won't be doing that here. But we got to there. We finally got to the current part of the Israel-Hamas conflict on the last episode, which is episode 87. And we covered a lot. Talked about a lot there. We had ended episode 3 right at the beginning of Hamas, right with their creation. And then episode 4 brought us through the 90s, the early 2000s. We got to the Israelis removing their settlements in 2005, which people have said is still, I was hearing even today, this morning, they were saying that, and which I think I mentioned on the last episode is one of the possibilities, is that they just want to blow it up, Israel does, so they can rebuild it as their own. It's not that far-fetched knowing the history. I think you can't come out and tell the world that. You can't come out and say that at a press conference, right? But they were already there before, had to be forcefully removed in some cases, in certain capacities. The citizens, some of them when they didn't want to leave. I mean, like I said before, they brought in psychiatrists to, like, I don't know, for therapy for these guys. Like, I know that you initially took this land from somebody, and now they kind of want it back, and that's hard for you, but it's gonna be okay, because you know what? We have more stolen land right across that border. It's all for you, buddy. I mean, they did that though, and like I thought about doing more on that, right? I thought about going deeper into the conflict itself. Like I said, I don't think the episode warranted another episode, but it has made me think about and be very curious about the other conflicts that are just boiling, up to the surface. I don't know if I used that correctly, because truthfully, this is, imagine, let's use the Israel-Hamas conflict as an example. We see now that this had been going on for 70 years, right? Them going back and forth have been happening since literally right after World War II. So it's not like as we found, it's not a surprise that this even happened, but it was not being covered in the capacity that it is now. The deaths that were already happening over there. People were dying over there. Palestinians were dying before this. That's why they're mad, right? Israelis were also dying. It didn't make front page news. And so the idea with this is to go deeper and to find out what's happening in all the places that they're not that they're not telling us about, like there's some sort of conspiracy, but it's like that's not important to the American war machine and their news. I don't know if there's much else to say about that particular episode. 87, I think it really does speak for itself. I think we've done so much. Now I know I didn't get it all right. I definitely didn't get it all right, and I mispronounced a lot of stuff. But if you want to know what happened, how it happened, right? It's there for you. It's right there. We take it back 1,000 years, try to tell you why, how we even got to this place. But yeah, I mean that's that. We're gonna get into it. I think one more thing I will tell you guys before I get out of here to start the episode is I just watched this documentary. I don't think I've mentioned this before yet on the podcast. It's called Chowchilla. It's on Max, right? And these kids and one adult, they get kidnapped, and these dudes kidnap an entire school bus. Very ambitious, right? They kidnap an entire school bus in the 70s. It was 1976, somewhere between 74 and 76, and then they hide them underground. They somehow basically they put a van underground and then bury that, and then but you can still get to like the door. I'm not going to explain this correctly. I'm really not. But somehow they end up underground. These guys want to hold them for ransom, right? They want to make some money, some cashola. Because what it really is, these guys are already rich, right? But they want their own money. They don't want to spend daddy's money anymore. So their great idea, right, is to kidnap a bus full of kids. But then when they go home, basically in the time that they're home, all right, I have to tell you, because even if you watch it, it's still worth watching. They can't put in the ransom call because this is the 70s, and when the parents find out that the bus is missing, it's a small town. The whole town goes crazy and starts calling like the police and making all these phone calls, calling the news, and so that like the phones are so jammed they can't get in their ransom call, so they just go home, right? Then they see on the news the kids escaped, the kids got out, and the one adult. They lose their mind, try to escape the country. Check out the rest; it's worth your time. But yeah, we're gonna get on to the episode. Like I said, this is the first one, so of this particular one. If it's not good, let me know. I'm gonna try to figure out how to make this better. But this is something I really want to kind of dive into. Is just because this is the stuff that I think about. This is what we do. This is why we do any of this. My brain thinks about how did that happen stuff all the time. My brain thinks about bite-sized bio stuff all the time. I just think about people. I've always wanted to know about people and what happened to them and how did they get to be so smart to do whatever they did, and why did they die so early or in some weird place or whatever, or how does this work? Why is that? But when you always hear about these, you forget as an American who lives in a peaceful environment where we're just not at war and have never had war on our soil in the 300 to 400 years we've been existing. You forget that people are constantly fighting for their lives all over the world. You forget that, and I don't want to. I want to kind of know what's going on. So let's find out about the insurgency in Maghreb. Oh, but before we do that, all the socials, HDTHappen, HDTHappen.com, at HDTHappen22 for the TikTok. Is there anything else to say? Give us 5 stars wherever you found this. If you liked it, give us 2 stars. If you didn't like it, tell us why you didn't like it, because constructive criticism is always welcome. But yeah, so without further ado, as we know to do, here is the episode.
So it is pretty widespread. And unfortunately,
This is Bulami Bukarti, a senior Africa analyst at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change.
the model is robust. It is not ISIS sending fighters from Iraq or Syria. It is ISIS recruiting groups that are locally entrenched, that have been fighting in that region for long and know the area very well.
Okay, so we're here talking about how this all kind of started, right? How did the insurgency in the Maghreb begin? Because it's been going on for 30 years or so, depending on how you look at it, right? Because it starts with the Algerian Civil War, really, which started in 1992. But I like to go back even further, and you look at what caused the Algerian Civil War. It's actually really interesting because I did not realize, I did not know how much Islam had infiltrated. That sounds bad, but I mean, I guess permeated just northern Africa, or I guess Africa as a whole. I didn't realize that it was that dense out there. So what you see is basically the African Algeria was just not doing well in the 60s and 70s. They were growing too fast, right? They were growing too fast. There wasn't enough jobs for everybody, and it was the people there mostly spoke French, or the people who were in power spoke French. But there was a lot of Arabs who were coming and had been coming to this land for probably about the last, 12 to 1300 years. And so much so that they'd almost kind of shifted the scale, right? They kind of like equaled it out in this area. And so they were mad that, the educated Muslims in the area couldn't get any jobs. So they start to protest. And so they want, we start to get to the 80s. They're protesting that basically the party that's in power, the FLN, let me see if I can get their actual name. Is it the FLN? The National Liberation Front, which goes by their French acronym, the FLN, was the main political party, right, in Algeria in the 80s and before that. So they finally get them to open up and say, let's change the constitution, right? Change it to, let's allow them to have more than one political party allow them to exist in Algeria, right? The FLN, they finally give in, they do that. Does not go well for them, because for the next 3 elections, the political parties that they allow in are the ones that win. So the FLN goes from being super duper in power to just not having that much power. That does not sit well with them. That brings us to 1992. So this party called the FIS. Let me see if I can get their name. It's harder. Where's it at? Oh, the Islamic Salvation Front. They're the ones who've been in power now for the last 4 or 5 years. Like I said, FLN does not like that. Excuse me, 2 years. They've been in power for 2 years. And so what they do is they stage a coup d'etat in 1992, and they take out the leader, right? Well, I don't think they take him out. I think he just leaves. Let me see. I don't think he actually dies. Yeah, they just forced him to resign. I had this guy getting dead and shot up. He was just sign this, I'll be out of you guys' hair. And then so the FLN, they come back to power. And people don't like that because they wanted the FIS to remain in power. And that's kind of what begins the Algerian Civil War. And there's a reason we talk about that is because that's what the Algerian Civil War is really what begins the insurgency in Maghreb. It is almost that easy. They continued fighting under different names pretty much since 1992. They go from the Algerian Civil War goes from 1992 to 2002. And then directly after that, they just continue to fight from 2002 on really into the present. These guys go at it. And that's why this was one of the first ones that I picked, was because this was one of the first ones at the top of the list because it was one of the most deadly. We're talking, at least, I don't want to get the numbers wrong here. So they're saying, so at least 70,000 people have probably died in this war over the last, I'm not sure, I guess they're counting, that's a cumulative. So they're counting from 2002. So they're not even counting the Algerian Civil War, which, like I said, it's the same people. It's the exact same people in the exact same country. This 14,000 last year. 14,000 people died last year in this war. This is all happening in, Northwest Africa, and that's kind of what. That's what I don't know if we've covered it. I guess we can go ahead and cover it. What the Maghreb actually is.
The Maghreb is the northern African region between the Sahara Desert and the Mediterranean Sea. Maghreb in Arabic, the place where the sun sets, is the westernmost part of the Arab and Muslim worlds. A historic crossroads between Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, it remains tied to the politics and security of these regions. Most of the population is of Arab, indigenous Berber, or mixed descent.
I didn't actually realize that it was split up like that. There's the western and the eastern side. I believe the eastern side, I'm going to get it wrong, but I'm trying. Is it the Mashariq? Is that what I think is what the eastern side of the Arab world is called, where all of the main known wars are at? Like what's happening right now in Israel and all that stuff. The Maghreb. The people, if you're wondering how they kind of split up, they're basically Arab and what are called the Berber people. The Berber are a special type of people because they've been in that place for, I think 10,000 years, if not a little bit more than that. They predate the Arab migration to that area. They're specifically, they've been there for a minute. What is also interesting about these people is what I was telling you about, how they were coming up with the Algerian Civil War in the 80s, and how they're all, they were Muslim. What some of them did was actually go over to Afghanistan, right, and fight against the Soviet Union with Afghanistan, because what they would end up doing, what ends up happening with the actual current insurgency in Maghreb, is the people who are fighting they're part of Al Qaeda. They pledged allegiance to Al Qaeda probably almost 15 to 16 years ago. It's like 2007. What is that? Is that 17 years ago? Yeah. And so, but all these roots start in the 80s, which that's why I wanted to go back and even talk about what the conflict is, because when you really think about it, some of these people were they were trained, and funded by America, because we all know that's when America was funding, the Islamic tribes in Afghanistan, to create the Mujahideen to fight against the Soviets. This is the exact same people that they left Algeria and went to Afghanistan to fight with these exact same people, and then they come back. And then they have the Algerian Civil War. It's I don't know. It's a smaller world than what you think. I guess when you're over there, it's you're not really that far from any of these places, truthfully. But yeah, I mean that's the breakdown. And I can tell you a little bit from having watched a fair amount of documentaries, which will also all be on the website under the works cited for this week's episode. It's really I mean, interesting doesn't even begin to really to say it. It's so I guess wild. I don't know. It makes sense. I mean, because it's the Middle East, right? It's the Middle East. I was always like, east of what? East of what? But I mean, it's not so much east of what as a sense of it's been chopped up into two areas. There's the east and there's the west, and we're talking about the west in this particular time. I never realized how basically Islamic extremism had also taken over in that area, and that those guys are fighting the same thing. I watched a documentary specifically on these group of men, and it must be said, the Maghreb, it makes up at least, I want to say, 6 to 8 countries. Let me see if I can get those countries. Yeah, here we are. We're talking Mali, Niger, Tunisia, Chad, Ivory, Mauritania, Ghana, Nigeria. And so what it is like all these guys, they all are in one particular part of Africa. And then there's one part I think it's called the Sahel, that kind of runs, I think it's, it's hard to put it because I know we're not looking at a map together, but it's a little bit further off the coast, and it runs kind of as a line all the way across the continent.
The Sahel is the northern African region that spans the southern length of the Sahara Desert. Sahel, meaning shore in Arabic, refers to the desert's edge. Its major industries include agriculture, hydrocarbons, and the mining of gold and uranium.
And that's where I think the jihadists and the extremists have really gotten their stronghold from the stuff that I've watched. But all these guys are battling them differently. They all have different levels of military, and it's really interesting when I was watching the documentary that the lady was explaining why it's so different, why war is so different in Africa compared to other continents, and and she made so much sense. It's like they fight a lot. Like Africans fight a lot, just as much as any other people do. They have wars, right? But they war within each other. They don't really fight, as she called them, interstate wars. They don't go out and say, I'm going to conquer this other African nation. They don't really do that. So that because they don't do that, they don't have the same military industrial complex, ideas and thought process that we do in America, or that they do in Asia, or that they do in Europe. And I was like, wow, like you think about that. Like these people, like they fight each other, tooth and nail, but they all just fight themselves. There's a lot of infighting between tribes to try to run the country. It's never really about, let me go get that other country. So their armies are not very big to begin with. So these guys don't have a very there's not a very robust, military at all, and so they don't have much to fight with. I was watching, I think only one or two of these guys actually has planes, and they will go out and they will try to blow up some of these jihad. Like they're really. It's, I guess that was what was so interesting to me is that I didn't know that Africans were also fighting terrorism. I really didn't, and I mean, I wonder if you did. Because, yeah, if I told you there's wars in Africa, you'd be like, yeah, of course there are. But I was like, they're against, like, Islamic, like, they're against Al-Qaeda, bro. Like, they're fighting Al-Qaeda in Africa. Like, why is that not front page news? What I was in the grocery store today, and I looked at all the magazines. I didn't see one that mentioned it. I saw Taylor Swift. I saw this thing about dogs and something about Southern living, but I didn't see anything about any of these conflicts. And it's just like this, because they're so worried about, and that's what blows my mind about the current message in the world, as far as from the West, specifically America and a few of our allies, is that they're so worried about communism. That's what this whole Russia-Ukraine war is about. I mean, it's not about communism specifically, but it's about the old idea of the Iron Curtain. The idea that has literally gotten us into so many wars. It's not funny. It's literally not funny. It's why we got into Vietnam. It's why we were in the Cold War. We're always afraid that if this country gets communism, then the next country will get communism, and so forth and so forth. So we have to continue to uphold this democratic process, or else the whole world will just be blown to bits. Meanwhile, there are plenty of other governments around the world that do not use democracy in any real shape or form, and they seem to be doing okay. And I'm not advocating for that. I like what I do. I like what I do. I like being able to do this podcast and live in a place with free speech. So I like being in America. So, and I think that it's an experiment that relatively worked out. Time will only tell. But I don't think that just because we think it's cool that everyone else has to think it's cool. I really don't. I think that I can understand why people want that. I can understand why you would want that, right? But I think that's in the similar fashion of trying to tell a woman what to do with her body from me as a man, right? Like I'm not in your body. I'm not over there, right? I don't live that life as a woman. I don't live that life, you know what I mean, as a citizen of another country. So how do I get to tell you what works for you? I've never understood it. I've never understood how we just go around forcing democracy down people's throats. And I like it. I like democracy. But I'm still like, let them figure it out. Kind of got off track, but that's the bigger picture to me, and that's why these wars are important, though. That's why this is stuff that I feel like needs to be talked about, and I hope we cover even more of these. I mean, the real takeaway from this, if you take away anything from listening to Current Conflicts episode number 1, the Insurgency in Maghreb, is that they're fighting terrorism in Africa. The same reasons we went to 9/11, or excuse me, that sentence doesn't even make sense. The same reasons that we went to Iraq and Afghanistan after 9/11 is, and it's not the same reasons, but the same people, the same ideas. Literally, quite literally, as I said in the earlier part of the podcast, these guys were trained in some cases by the Mujahideen, which was funded and trained by the CIA. So some of these guys are literally they're just like the third or fourth generation of what America started, and it's happening in an entirely different country, in an entirely different region. That's going, almost relatively unheard of, and it's hard. I mean, maybe it's hard because it happens. Like I said, this encompasses so many different countries, we're talking, well, let me run it up. It's 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. We're talking 16 different countries. And they're all having different versions of these same wars because of these jihadists. But yeah, so I think how this is going to work. I think how this is going to work is that what I'll do is I think I'll go back, or as time goes on, we'll do other stuff, we'll do other conflicts, but maybe in a few months I'll check back in with this particular conflict. Possibly. I'm not sure. Like I said, this is episode 1, so we'll see what happens. But this has been the Insurgency in Maghreb. All right, episode 1 in the books, the Insurgency in Maghreb. I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. You know how it is around here. We're about 40% kill rate on our pronunciations. But this stuff I feel like is important. I feel like it's also stuff I don't know. I don't want to say you, because I don't know what you do in your life. Maybe you are totally read up on this. Maybe you took a class on the Algerian Civil War or something in high school, because I'm sure places offer that. But it's what's not being talked about, and I feel like that's the stuff that ends up showing up on your radar sooner or later. Tongue got really heavy right there. Because imagine this. Imagine. We don't want this to happen, but imagine they take over some sort of crazy tourist resort or something with 700 Americans there, right? And that would definitely make the news. That's gonna be on. That's gonna be on CNN. David Muir will be talking about that on the nightly news for sure. Lester Holt's gonna bust out a monologue about this resort and the 700 tourists that are there. But why is no one talking about whatever conditions that made it happen that way in the first place? We talked about it. That's why I wanted to go back a little bit, even with the conflict. It's what even made them have a conflict in the first place? What created the unrest? It's not always the same. It's usually actually not that different. But how they react to it is usually different, but it's usually always the same. Russia, we looked at Russia, it's the same way. And you look at what the Soviet Union, it is literally the Workers' Party. It literally happened because they changed the way the world worked in their world. They went from serfdom to basically some form of, I guess I don't want to say, well, they really didn't know what to do. They went from serfdom into this whole new vast world where they had to try to make money. They had to try to make a living, right? And there was no work. So all these guys get together, all these workers get together, and they're like, we like communism. I'm paraphrasing. I'm probably skipping 6 books in history, but this is kind of what happens. And the Workers' Party, the Soviet Union, becomes powerful. But they're all reacting to trying to survive. And that's all this is. That's all those dudes were doing in that documentary. I say you should go check it out, because there's these farmers, these African farmers, who have banded together, and they have their little militia, and they're fighting these jihadists. And what they are, these guys are also they're just other Africans really who have picked up the Al Qaeda flag and are waving it because they have nothing else going on. It's the same thing. They also don't have jobs. Well, you know what I mean? Not everyone's going to be a farmer, so there's other things. But if there's nothing around, Al Qaeda don't sound so bad. But yeah, so we're definitely going to talk about some more of these conflicts. Hope you guys liked it. There'll be another, I guess, like I said, we're going to do one of these and then one bite-sized bio. So it'll be 2 How Did That Happens a month, and then we'll have one bite-sized bio, one current conflicts, but they will both be mini episodes for the main podcast. But that's enough rambling here. We're going to go ahead and get out of here. Give us 5 stars wherever you found this. 2 stars if you didn't like it. Tell us why you didn't like it, because constructive criticism is always welcome. HDTAppen.com, at HDTAppen for all the socials, HDTAppen22 for the TikTok, and we'll see you next week with the next How Did That